She arrived in New York City with one suitcase, $60, and a friend's address written on a folded piece of paper. 3 years later, she would be standing in the most photographed wedding the city had seen that year. But on the night she arrived, cold, tired, and quietly terrified, none of that was even imaginable. This is the story of Sofia Reyes, and it begins on a couch. Not a bedroom, not a guest room with fresh sheets and a window that looked out at the city skyline. A couch, a narrow, slightly worn sofa in the corner of a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, with a thin blanket folded over the armrest and a pillow that smelled like someone else's fabric softener. That couch was the first thing New York City gave Sofia Reyes, and she was grateful for it. That is the first thing you need to understand about her. That she was the kind of woman who could be genuinely grateful for a couch, who could wake up at 5:30 in the morning on a cushion that was 2 inches too short for her frame and think, with complete sincerity, this is the beginning. Not the destination, not the failure, the beginning. That quality, that specific, undefeatable belief in the beginning of things, was the thing that would change everything. It always does, in the end. Not luck, not connections, not being in the right place at the right time, though that matters too. But the belief, the stubborn, quiet, completely unreasonable belief that the story is still being written and that the next page has not been turned yet. Before we go any further into Sofia's story, take a moment right now and let us know in the comments where you are watching from tonight. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Because on this channel, every story we tell is the kind that finds you exactly when you need it most. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to New Mexico, to a small town called Belen, 45 minutes south of Albuquerque, where Sofia Reyes grew up in a 2-bedroom house with her mother Rosa, her grandmother Carmen, and a front yard that her grandmother kept so full of marigolds that the neighbors used to joke you could smell their house before you could see it. Sofia was the first in her family to finish college. She had a degree in communications from the University of New Mexico, a 3.9 GPA, and a voice that her professors described, without exaggeration, as one of the clearest and most naturally authoritative they had heard in 20 years of teaching. She also had $23 left in her bank account after graduation, no job offers, and the particular feeling that comes from being overqualified for every position available in the town where you grew up. New York City had been the dream since she was 12 years old, and her grandmother gave her a book about the city's architecture for Christmas, and she had sat in the marigold-scented front yard and looked at photographs of the skyline, and felt something in her chest that she could not name then, but would understand later as recognition. As if she had seen it before. As if she was simply looking at a place she had not arrived at yet. She called Diana Cruz in February of the year she turned 28. They had been friends at university. Not the closest of friends. Not the kind who called every Sunday and knew each other's families by name. But the kind who had shared 2 classes and a study group and a mutual fondness for bad coffee and honest conversation. Diana had moved to New York City 4 years earlier. She had a job, an apartment, a life that looked, from the outside, like exactly what Sofia was trying to build. When Sofia called and explained what she was thinking, Diana had said yes immediately, quickly, warmly, with the particular enthusiasm of someone who was genuinely pleased to be asked. Of course, Diana said. Come, we will figure it out together. Sofia had heard those words and felt the knot in her chest loosen for the first time in months. She had not known, in that moment, the cost at which Diana had said yes. She had not known that yes, in Diana's mouth, had come with conditions that Diana had not yet fully articulated even to herself. She had not known that the apartment she was being invited into had a bedroom with a locked door and a couch in the living room that Diana had already decided, before the conversation had ended, was where Sofia would sleep. She had not known any of this. She had only heard yes. And sometimes yes is all you need to take the first step. Sofia Reyes arrived at Penn Station on a Thursday evening in March with one rolling suitcase, a backpack, $60 in cash, and the address of Diana's apartment in the Bronx written on a piece of paper she had folded into her jacket pocket because she was afraid her phone battery would die on the train and she would need something physical to hold on to. The city hit her the way it hits everyone who comes to it for the first time from somewhere smaller. Like a wall of sound and light and motion that does not apologize and does not slow down and does not care at all whether you are ready for it. She stood at the top of the stairs coming out of Penn Station onto 8th Avenue, and she felt the wind come at her from 3 directions at once, and she looked up at the buildings rising around her in every direction, and she thought, I am here. She did not think, I am going to be okay. She did not know that yet. But she was here. She had gotten here. And that, on that Thursday evening in March, was enough. Diana Cruz met her at the apartment door with a hug that was warm and genuine and lasted exactly long enough to feel real. She had made dinner, rice and beans and chicken, simple and good, and they sat at the small kitchen table and talked for 2 hours the way old friends do when they have been living separate lives and have a great deal of catching up to accomplish. Diana told Sofia about her job. She worked in the administrative department of a mid-sized property management company called Montoya Group, handling scheduling and correspondence for the operations team. It paid decently, she said, and the building was beautiful, and the people were mostly fine, and she had been there for 3 years and was still waiting for the promotion that kept being discussed and never quite arriving. She said this last part with a smile, the kind of smile that is not really a smile, but has learned to look like one. Sofia told Diana about Belen, about her mother Rosa who still worked at the elementary school, about her grandmother Carmen whose marigolds had bloomed early that year, about the degree and the GPA, and the voice that her professors had praised, and the $23, and the particular feeling of being exactly ready for something that had not arrived yet. Diana listened. She nodded at the right moments. She refilled Sofia's water glass. And when the conversation reached the natural pause that comes late in an evening when everything important has been said, Diana showed Sofia the living room and the couch with the thin blanket and the pillow, and said, with the warm and practiced tone of someone who has rehearsed a reasonable explanation, "It's just temporary. The apartment is small. You understand." Sofia understood. She said so. She meant it. She made up the couch, and she lay down, and she looked at the ceiling of Diana Cruz's apartment in the Bronx, and she thought, this is the beginning. And she slept. What Diana had not told Sofia, and what Sofia would not understand for some time, was that the apartment had a second bedroom. It was small, barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser, but it existed. Diana used it for storage. She had considered, in the days before Sofia arrived, whether she should clear it out and offer it to her. She had decided against it for reasons she did not examine too carefully at the time. The reasons, had she examined them, would have told her something about herself that she was not ready to look at. Diana Cruz was not a cruel person. That is important to say. She was not calculating in the way of someone who plots deliberately against another person with clear malice. She was something more human and more complicated than that. She was a person who had worked very hard for 4 years and had not yet received what she believed she deserved, and who had invited someone younger and brighter and more effortlessly capable into her home, and was now watching that person sleep on her couch and feeling, underneath the genuine warmth and the rice and beans and the 2-hour conversation, a low and persistent hum of something she could not name. Comparison, perhaps, or the particular anxiety of someone who has been in a race for a long time and has just realized that another runner has joined the track and appears to be moving faster without appearing to be trying. She tucked that feeling away. She went to bed. She told herself it was nothing. It was not nothing, but it would take time for that to become clear. Diana got Sofia a job the following Monday. She spoke to the building manager at the Montoya Tower, the 40-story glass and steel building on 5th Avenue that served as the headquarters of Montoya Group, and secured Sofia a position on the janitorial staff. It paid $13 an hour and required her to be at the building by 6 in the morning, and the uniform was a gray coverall that was 2 sizes too large, and the work was exactly what it sounds like: mopping, cleaning, emptying bins, maintaining the lobbies and hallways and bathrooms of one of the most prestigious commercial buildings in Midtown Manhattan. Sofia took the job with both hands. She showed up on her first day 15 minutes early in the gray coverall with her hair pulled back, and she introduced herself to the other members of the janitorial team with the same clear, direct warmth that she brought to every interaction she had ever had. And by the end of the first week, 3 of her colleagues had specifically requested to be assigned to the same floors as her because she made the early mornings feel less like early mornings. She was that kind of person. She could not help it. It was not a strategy. It was simply who she was. The lobbies she maintained were immaculate. The brass fittings on the elevator doors gleamed. The floors reflected the ceiling lights like mirrors. the building manager noticed. He noted it in his weekly report without fully understanding why he was noting it. It was the kind of thing you noted when something had been done by someone who cared whether it was done well. She had been working at the Montoya Tower for 6 weeks when the morning happened that would change everything. It was a Tuesday in late April, one of those New York spring mornings that arrives without warning, warm and bright after weeks of gray cold, the kind of morning that makes the city feel briefly and completely like a place that wants you to be happy. Sofia was arriving for her shift, coming through the service entrance on the side of the building with her cart, when she heard the small collision happen on the main entrance sidewalk. A man in a dark coat was walking toward the building's main doors from the direction of the street. A woman with a tray of coffees was walking in the opposite direction, not looking where she was going, talking on the phone. The collision was inevitable, and it was complete. The coffee tray went sideways, and the largest cup came directly down the front of the man's coat in a long, dark river of what appeared to be a double espresso. Sofia heard the impact before she turned to look. When she turned, the man was standing very still, looking down at his coat with an expression that was caught somewhere between composure and the particular controlled displeasure of someone who has an important meeting in 11 minutes and has just lost the ability to attend it without looking like a barista's accident report. Sofia did not think about what she did next. She simply did it. She had a clean cloth on her cart. She always kept one, because in 6 weeks of maintaining the Montoya Tower's lobbies, she had learned that the building's surfaces required constant, immediate attention, and that waiting for the right moment was how stains became permanent. She moved toward the man, produced the cloth, and addressed the coffee with the efficient calm of someone who has been paying attention to how things work and has a natural instinct for making them right again. The man was Gabriel Montoya. Sofia did not know this at the time. She would know it in approximately 4 minutes, when the lobby security guard, a large, gentle man named Frank who had worked the Montoya Tower's front desk for 11 years, would see her crouched over the CEO's coat with a cleaning cloth and would go slightly pale and say, in a voice that managed to be both a whisper and a shout simultaneously, "Sofia, that's Mr. Montoya." But in the moment itself, on the sidewalk on Fifth Avenue at 8:47 in the morning, she simply knew him as a man in a ruined coat who needed someone to help. She worked quickly and methodically, and as she did, she spoke, not to fill silence, not to apologize on behalf of the universe for the coffee situation, but practically, describing what she was doing and why, in the clear and measured voice that was simply how Sofia Reyes had always spoken when she had something worth saying. Gabriel Montoya, who was 38 years old and had been running one of the most prominent real estate and development companies in New York City for 9 years and who had, in those 9 years, been helped by a great many people in a great many contexts, looked at her when she finished. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you have been caught off guard not by what they did, but by how they did it, with the particular attention of a person who notices things and has just noticed something worth noticing. He said, "You speak very well." And he said it with genuine appreciation, which did not make it less careless. Sofia looked up at him. She held his gaze for a moment with an expression that was perfectly calibrated between warmth and something that was absolutely not going to let that pass unremarked. She raised one eyebrow, just slightly, and said, "Most people do, Mr." She paused, because she did not yet know his name. When someone takes the time to listen, there was a beat of silence, and then Gabriel Montoya laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, the kind that starts in the chest and arrives without permission. He looked at her with a new quality of attention, the kind that meant he was updating something. And he said, "Come to my office after your shift. Ask for Gabriel Montoya." And then he walked through the main doors of his own building. Sofia stood on the sidewalk for a moment after he went inside. Frank, the security guard, was at her elbow immediately. "Do you know who that is?" he said. She said she did now. "He's the owner," Frank said, in a tone that managed to convey both the gravity of this fact and a genuine curiosity about what had just happened. Sofia looked at the lobby doors through which Gabriel Montoya had just disappeared. She thought about the eyebrow. She thought about whether the eyebrow had been a mistake. She decided it had not been. Then she went to do her shift. She mopped the third-floor corridors and cleaned the fourth-floor bathrooms and emptied the bins on floors 5 through 8, and she thought about what "come to my office" might mean in the context of a cleaning staff employee who had just told the CEO of the building that most people speak, well, when someone listens to them. She arrived at the possible conclusions in order of likelihood, and she did not care for most of them. But she had said what she had said, and she had meant it, and she had been raised by Rosa Reyes and Carmen Reyes to mean the things she said and to stand behind them when the time came. So at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when her shift ended, she took off her coverall and smoothed her hair, and she went to the 34th floor, and she knocked on the door that said Gabriel Montoya, Chief Executive Officer, and she walked in. The office was large and warm and full of natural light from 2 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out at Midtown Manhattan in every direction. Gabriel Montoya was standing at his desk when she came in, and he gestured to the chair across from him, and he sat down, and she sat down, and he looked at her for a moment before he spoke, the way someone looks at a person they are about to offer something to, calibrating whether the offering is right. He said he had spoken to Human Resources. He said he had reviewed her personnel file, which showed that in 6 weeks she had not been late once, had received 3 unsolicited positive mentions from senior staff, and had maintained a section of the building whose cleanliness standard had measurably improved from the previous quarter's metrics. He said, "I notice people. It is the only skill that has never let me down." He told her he was offering her a position as his executive assistant. He told her the salary. It was 6 times what she was making on the janitorial staff. He told her she would start on Monday if she said yes, and that if she wanted time to think about it, she could have until Friday. Sofia looked at him across the desk. She thought about the couch. She thought about the $60 she had arrived with and the $14 currently in her bank account after 6 weeks of rent contribution and Metro cards and the 1 grocery run she had allowed herself that week. She thought about her mother Rosa in Belen, who called every Sunday and always asked, "How is the city treating you?" Mija, and to whom Sofia always said, "It's getting better, Mama," because she believed in saying the things that were becoming true before they had fully arrived. She said yes. She did not need until Friday. She went back to Diana's apartment that evening, and she sat at the kitchen table, and she told Diana everything. The coffee, the sidewalk, the eyebrow. Diana laughed at the eyebrow, a real laugh, unguarded. The office, the conversation, the salary figure that made Sofia's voice go slightly unsteady when she said it out loud, because even saying it felt presumptuous, like she was claiming something that had not yet fully agreed to belong to her. Diana's face, across the kitchen table, did something complicated. It went through warm and arrived at something else. Not cold, not hostile. Something quieter than both of those things, something that lived in the space between genuine happiness for a friend and the particular private grief of a person who has been waiting for their own version of that story for 4 years and has just heard it arrive for someone else in 6 weeks. Diana said all the right things. She hugged Sofia. She said she always knew Sofia was going to do something like this. She said she was proud of her. She meant some of it. And later that night, alone in her bedroom with the door closed, she lay on her back and looked at the ceiling and began, very quietly and very carefully, to think. Sofia started as Gabriel Montoya's executive assistant on a Monday morning in May, and within 2 weeks, it was clear to everyone who worked on the 34th floor that something had shifted in the atmosphere of the office in a way that was difficult to articulate, but impossible to ignore. Not because Sofia was flashy, or because she announced herself, or because she changed anything dramatically. Precisely because she did not do any of those things. She was simply present in the way that truly capable people are present, fully, quietly, with an attention to detail that was not showy, but was absolutely consistent. She learned the rhythm of Gabriel's schedule in the first week, and by the second week, she was adjusting it in ways he had not asked her to, and had not noticed she had done until he found himself arriving at a difficult board meeting having had 45 minutes of preparation time that he hadn't been expecting, and realizing that she had quietly moved 2 things to create it. He stopped by her desk. He said, "Did you adjust my Tuesday?" She said yes. She told him why. He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Good." He walked back into his office. That was all. But the way he said it, the particular quality of that single word, good, spoken in the tone of someone who has been looking for something for a long time and has found it without expecting to, was not lost on the other members of the 34th floor staff, who were paying the kind of attention that office environments always pay when something is happening that no one has yet officially acknowledged. Gabriel Montoya was, by every measure that the city used to measure such things, an extraordinary man. He had built Montoya Group from a single commercial property his father had left him at 24 into a portfolio that now included 17 buildings across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, 3 mixed-use developments in New Jersey, and a community housing initiative in the South Bronx that had been cited by the mayor's office as a model for private sector urban development. He was known in the city's business community as someone who was both genuinely visionary and rigorously detail-oriented, which is a rarer combination than it sounds. Most people who are good at the big picture are impatient with the small one, and most people who are meticulous about the details cannot see past them to the shape of the whole. Gabriel could do both. He held them simultaneously, the way a very good architect holds the blueprint and the building at the same time, understanding that one is meaningless without the other. He was also, and this mattered to the people who worked for him, genuinely kind. Not performatively kind. Not the kind of kind that is actually a management strategy, but quietly, actually kind, in the specific way of someone who has not forgotten what it felt like to be the person at the beginning of something, before the 34th floor and the corner office and the meetings with the mayor. He remembered every person's name in every building he owned. He sent handwritten notes when people in his company had babies or lost parents. He had been known to stop a board meeting to call the building's janitor by name and ask how his daughter's soccer tournament had gone. This was not performance. It was character. It was the character that Sofia Reyes recognized from her first week on the 34th floor, because it was not entirely unlike her own. What Gabriel was considerably less good at was answering his mother's phone calls. Elena Montoya was 64 years old, sharp as a surgical instrument, possessed of opinions on every subject including and especially her son's personal life, and constitutionally incapable of leaving a voicemail when a direct conversation was available as an alternative. She called Gabriel at minimum once a day. She had been calling him once a day for 38 years, and she was not going to stop now simply because he had taken to letting it go to voicemail. The calls had escalated in recent months for a specific reason that Gabriel was very clear on and very unwilling to engage with. Elena had decided, with the finality of a woman who has decided something and considers the matter settled, that her son needed to get married. He was 38. He had been in 2 relationships in the past decade, neither of which had lasted more than 18 months. Elena had met both women, had found both women perfectly acceptable, and had watched both relationships end with the particular patient frustration of someone waiting for a bus that keeps pulling up to the stop and then driving away without opening its doors. She had stopped asking Gabriel about it directly. He deflected with a skill that she grudgingly admired, and had moved to the strategy of simply calling every day and mentioning it in passing, folded into conversations about other things, in the hope that sustained, gentle pressure would eventually produce results. Gabriel had responded to this strategy by letting it go to voicemail. The voicemails accumulated. He listened to them on Sunday evenings in order. Like a podcast, he found both irritating and comforting. It was on a Wednesday afternoon in June, Sofia's 5th week as Gabriel's executive assistant, that Elena Montoya's call came through on the office main line instead of Gabriel's personal cell. Gabriel was in a meeting with the development team that was running over by 40 minutes and his cell was on his desk, and Sofia was at her station outside his office when the main line rang and the caller ID showed a number she did not recognize with a 505 area code, which she recognized as New Mexico, because she had grown up there, and because Sofia Reyes paid attention to the details of things. She answered, as she answered every call, with clear and professional warmth. "Good afternoon, Montoya Group. This is Sofia." The woman on the other end of the line said, "Hello, Sofia. My name is Elena Montoya. I am Gabriel's mother, and I have been trying to reach him for 4 days, and I would like to leave him a message that communicates, without being rude, that I am not pleased about this." Sofia considered this for exactly 1 second. Then she said, "Mrs. Montoya, I completely understand. I am going to make sure he gets that message. And while I have you, is there anything else I can help with today?" There was a brief pause, and then Elena Montoya said, "You know what, Sofia, tell me a little bit about yourself." They talked for 45 minutes. Elena had intended to leave a crisp message and return to whatever she had been doing before the phone call. That was not what happened. What happened was Sofia Reyes, who had grown up in New Mexico with a mother who worked at an elementary school and a grandmother who grew marigolds, and who had spent 28 years developing the habit of being genuinely interested in the people she was talking to, simply asked Elena Montoya questions and then listened. Actually listened, to the answers. Elena talked about her home in Santa Fe, which she had moved to after Gabriel's father died 7 years ago, because she had always wanted to live somewhere with that quality of light and had decided that waiting for the right time was the same as deciding not to do it at all. She talked about the garden she was building, which was giving her more trouble than she had anticipated because the soil was different from what she was used to. She talked about the tamale recipe she had been perfecting for 40 years and the one specific ingredient that she was convinced was the difference between a good tamale and a great one, and which her sister Marta refused to believe made any difference at all, which was a source of ongoing and completely enjoyable disagreement between them. Sofia, who had grown up eating her grandmother Carmen's tamales and who had specific and informed opinions about what made them extraordinary, engaged with this conversation with a directness and a depth of knowledge that clearly surprised Elena, because halfway through the tamale discussion Elena said, "Sofia, where are you from originally?" And when Sofia said New Mexico, Elena laughed a deep and genuine laugh and said, "Of course you are. I knew there was something about you." When Gabriel came out of his meeting 50 minutes after it had been scheduled to end, he found Sofia at her desk with the phone to her ear, leaning slightly forward with the focused, lit-up expression she wore when she was in a conversation that had her full attention. He heard her say, "No, but that is exactly what my grandmother always said. She said the masa has to rest, that it is not a step you can rush, that the resting is where the flavor actually develops." He heard the voice on the other end of the line respond with a warmth that he recognized even through the phone speaker from the other side of the room. He stopped walking. He stood very still. Sofia looked up and saw him and made the small gesturing motion that means one moment, and he stood there and waited, which was not something Gabriel Montoya typically did in the context of his own office on a Wednesday afternoon. But he did it now because something about the quality of the conversation he was overhearing had made him curious in a way he had not anticipated and was not entirely sure what to do with. Sofia wrapped up the call, warmly, specifically, with a reference to the garden soil problem that Elena had mentioned and a suggestion about a particular amendment that her grandmother had used in New Mexico clay that might be worth trying. And then she put down the phone and looked at Gabriel and said, before he could speak, "Your mother says to call her back." She was very clear about that. Gabriel looked at her. He said, "Was that my mother?" Sofia said it was. He said, "You were talking to my mother for," he checked his watch, 53 minutes? Sofia said that sounded about right. He leaned against the doorframe of his office with an expression that she would come to know well over the following months. A specific combination of amusement and genuine bewilderment that appeared on his face when the world behaved in ways he had not modeled for. And he said, "My mother doesn't talk to people. She interrogates them, and then she doesn't call back." Sofia considered this. "She called back," she said. "For times, apparently." Gabriel looked at her for another moment. Then he went into his office and closed the door and sat at his desk and thought about that for considerably longer than the situation technically required. Elena did call back. The next day, and the day after that. Within 3 weeks, she was calling Sofia directly on the office line, bypassing the attempt to reach Gabriel entirely, because, as she told her sister Marta, she had found in Gabriel's new assistant someone who actually listened, which was rarer than it should be, and which Elena had decided she was not going to take for granted. Their conversations covered the garden, the tamales, a book Elena was reading that she wanted to discuss with someone who had opinions, the correct way to address a city council member at a neighborhood meeting, the difference between confidence and arrogance in young professionals, and, on one memorable Thursday afternoon, a 40-minute analysis of the specific qualities that made a person genuinely worth loving as opposed to merely attractive to be around. Sofia engaged with all of it with the same direct, warm, specific attention she brought to everything. She told Gabriel about the calls. She was not the kind of person who kept things from the person she worked for, and he received this information with an expression that suggested he was still processing the fact that his mother, who had not warmed to a single member of his staff in 15 years of him having staff, had apparently decided that his current executive assistant was a person she wanted in her life. He did not say much about it, but Sofia noticed, in the weeks that followed, that the Sunday voicemail backlog on his personal phone had stopped growing. He was calling his mother back. She did not mention this either. She simply noted it, the way she noted everything, and filed it in the part of her mind that was building, without quite intending to, a detailed and affectionate picture of who Gabriel Montoya actually was beneath the 34th floor and the corner office and the 9 years of building something extraordinary in a city that does not make that easy. Meanwhile, back in the Bronx, Diana Cruz was thinking. She had been thinking, quietly and carefully, since the night Sofia had told her about the job offer. The thinking had started as something she could have described as reasonable concern. She had convinced herself, in those first days, that she was simply being realistic about what it meant for two women who knew each other to work in the same building, one of them now in a significantly more prominent position than the other. But the thinking had deepened in the weeks since, taking on a texture that Diana would not have been comfortable describing out loud. She began to pay attention to the things Sofia said about the office, the meetings, the schedule adjustments, the slow accumulation of small moments that told a story about two people coming to understand each other. She began to pay attention in a specific way, looking not just at what Sofia was saying, but at what it implied, at what it meant for the trajectory of Sofia's life in the city that Diana had been living in for 4 years without that trajectory appearing for herself. The thinking was quiet. It was careful, and it was beginning to become something that went beyond thinking. Diana Cruz was not lazy. That is important to say, the way it was important to say earlier that she was not cruel. She had worked hard for 4 years at Montoya Group. She had shown up every day and done her job with competence and consistency, and had waited, as people wait who believe in the system of showing up and doing the work, for the recognition that ought to follow. The recognition had not followed. Not because she was undeserving of it. She was not. But because the city does not operate on the principle that deserving is sufficient. New York rewards a particular kind of boldness, a particular kind of visible ambition, a willingness to be seen wanting something badly enough that other people cannot help but see it too. Diana was competent in a way that was invisible. She was capable in a way that did not announce itself. And she had been doing this, being capable and invisible, for 4 years while watching other people around her be promoted for qualities she could not fully identify and definitely did not possess. She had brought Sofia to the city thinking, on some level, that having someone around who was newer and less settled might make her own position feel more solid by comparison. This is a very human thing to think, and a very inadvisable one. Because Sofia Reyes was not newer and less settled in any way that translated into smaller or less capable. She was newer to the city. She was not newer to herself. And the woman who had arrived with $60 and slept on a couch and taken a janitor job without complaint had turned out to be exactly the kind of person that New York City had been waiting to recognize. Diana started with something small. She mentioned to a colleague named Patricia, a woman in the operations department who was known in the office as someone who enjoyed information and circulated it freely, that she had noticed Sofia was spending a great deal of time in the CEO's office. She said it in a tone of mild concern, the tone of someone who is simply observing something and naming it out of a generalized professional conscientiousness, not out of any personal feeling. Patricia received this information with visible interest. Diana said nothing further. She did not need to. She had planted the observation in the right soil, and she understood, from 4 years of watching how office environments work, that she would not need to water it. Within a week, the observation had circulated through 3 departments and had acquired, in its circulation, the particular organic growth of unverified workplace speculation, additions and implications and questions that Diana had not added herself, but which her original observation had made room for. Sofia knew nothing about this. She was on the 34th floor, adjusting schedules and talking to Elena Montoya about garden soil, and the quiet campaign being conducted 2 floors below her was invisible to her in the way that quiet campaigns are designed to be. At home, Diana moved to the next step of the thinking she had been doing since May. She sat Sofia down one evening in late June, on the couch where Sofia still slept, which Diana had not mentioned since the day Sofia arrived, which Sofia had long since stopped expecting to change, and she told her, with the practiced tone of reasonableness that she had developed for this kind of conversation, that now that Sofia was earning a real salary, it was only fair that she contribute to the household expenses. Sofia agreed without hesitation. She had been planning to bring this up herself. She asked what Diana thought was reasonable. Diana named a figure. It was higher than the market rate for a couch in the Bronx, though neither of them said this out loud. But it was not so high as to be obviously unreasonable. And Sofia, who did not want to cause difficulty, and who was genuinely grateful for the roof, and the thin blanket, and the 4 months of mornings that had gotten her to this point, agreed to it, and began paying it the following week. Diana received the first payment with warm thanks. She folded it carefully, and she thought. The thinking, at this stage, had acquired a direction. It was moving toward a destination that Diana had not yet fully admitted to herself, but which she was, unmistakably, headed toward. Sofia called her mother Rosa that Sunday from a park bench 3 blocks from Diana's apartment. She liked to take her Sunday calls outside, in whatever weather, because the open air made her feel less like she was performing being okay and more like she was actually, incrementally, becoming it. Rosa asked how the city was treating her. Sofia said, for the first time, "It's treating me well, Mama. Not it's getting better. Not the future tense of something hoped for. The present tense of something arrived." She told her mother about the job, about the 34th floor, about the schedule adjustments and the board meetings and Elena Montoya's calls about tamale masa, and Rosa listened from Belen in the particular way that mothers listen when their children are telling them about becoming themselves, with a full and quiet joy that does not interrupt and does not comment and simply receives, because the receiving is enough, because the receiving is everything. When Sofia finished, Rosa said, "I always knew the city would know what to do with you, Mija." Sofia sat on the park bench in the July heat with the phone against her ear, and she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel since March. She felt, with complete clarity, that she was in the right place. That the $60 and the couch and the gray coverall and the eyebrow on the sidewalk had all been exactly the right steps on exactly the right path. She sat there for a few minutes after the call ended, in the warm afternoon, watching the city do what the city does, move and make noise, and be entirely indifferent to any individual story within it while simultaneously being made of nothing but individual stories. And she was, in that moment, completely and simply happy. Gabriel Montoya asked Sofia Reyes to dinner on a Friday evening in September. He was careful about how he asked. He was a careful person generally, and he was particularly careful about this because he understood what it meant to ask the person who worked directly for him to dinner, and he did not want it to be something that could be misread or that she would feel was something other than a genuine and voluntary invitation. He asked at the end of the workday, standing in the doorway of his office with his coat already on, and he said, "Sofia, I would like to take you to dinner. Not as your employer. As someone who would like to spend time with you outside of the context of schedule adjustments and my mother's tamale opinions. I want to be very clear about that distinction. And I want you to know that whatever you decide has no bearing on your position here, which is yours unconditionally." Sofia looked at him for a moment. She thought about the eyebrow. She thought about the Sunday evenings when his personal phone no longer accumulated voicemails. She thought about Elena Montoya telling her, on the phone 3 weeks ago, with the decisive warmth of a woman who says what she means, "My son is going to be an idiot about this for a little while longer. Be patient with him." Sofia had laughed. Elena had said, "I am completely serious." Sofia had believed her. She looked at Gabriel now, in the doorway with his coat on, being extraordinarily careful about asking her to dinner in a way that was both slightly formal and entirely genuine, and she thought that Elena was right. He had taken a little while, and she said yes. They went to a restaurant in the West Village that Gabriel had been to many times. He told her this as they were seated. "I have been here 100 times, and then, as the evening went on, he said very little that suggested he had been there before at all. He looked at the menu as if he were reading it for the first time. He asked the waiter questions he had probably asked before and listened to the answers as if they were new. He was, Sofia understood, experiencing something for the first time that he had done 100 times, because the person sitting across from him was new, and she made the ordinary feel specific. She made things matter by being fully present in them. This was something she had always done without knowing it was something she did. Gabriel knew it was something she did by the second course, because he was the kind of person who noticed things, and he sat across from her over pasta and good wine in the West Village, and he let himself notice it completely and without the management of it that he typically applied to things he felt. He told her about his father, about the single building his father had left him, about the specific morning he had stood in the lobby of that building at 24 years old with the deed in his hands, and understood that everything from that moment forward would be something he had built himself. She told him about her grandmother Carmen's marigolds and about the book about New York architecture that had been the beginning of everything. And he listened in the way that Elena had told her he rarely listened, with his full self, without looking at his phone, without the slight professional distance that was his habitual mode in the office. He walked her to the subway afterward. She was going back to the Bronx. She had not told him she was still on Diana's couch, and he had not asked, which she appreciated. And at the top of the stairs he said, "I would like to do this again." She said, "So would I." He smiled. She went down the stairs. She stood on the platform and felt the warm rush of air that comes before the train, and she thought, the story is still being written. She thought it with a joy that was so complete and so quiet that she almost didn't recognize it as joy. She almost mistook it for certainty, which, she would later understand, was the same thing. Word reached Diana about the dinner before Sofia had a chance to tell her. This was how Diana had arranged things. She had constructed, quietly and carefully over the preceding months, a small and reliable network of people in the building who mentioned things to her. Not formally, not as anything that could be named. Just people who were in the habit of passing things along. Someone had seen Gabriel and Sofia leave the building together on Friday evening. Someone else had seen them at the restaurant. A friend of a friend, a mention on the periphery. By Sunday morning, Diana knew. She did not tell Sofia she knew. She waited for Sofia to tell her. Sofia told her Sunday evening, coming back from her park bench phone call with Rosa, sitting at the kitchen table with a warmth about her that Diana recognized as the warmth of someone whose life is moving in the direction they had always believed it would move in. Diana listened. She nodded at the right moments. She asked the right questions. She said, "Sofia, I am so happy for you." She meant approximately half of it. The other half was the thing she had been thinking about since May, the thing that had been growing in the quiet and the dark of her bedroom with the door closed, the thing that was now large enough that she could no longer pretend it was something small. She went to bed that night, and she lay on her back, and she made a decision. The decision was not large, as decisions go. It was quiet and specific, and it moved in one direction only, and it would, in the months that followed, cost her something she had not yet calculated and would not be able to get back. Diana made her move in October. She had been in Montoya Group long enough to know which people in the building talked, and to whom, and about what, and she spent the month of October in a series of conversations that were careful and brief, and that left behind them, in the professional soil of the building's social ecosystem, a series of seeds that she trusted the environment to grow. The seeds were variations on a theme. That Sofia Reyes's rapid rise from the janitorial staff to the CEO's executive assistant, and now, apparently, the CEO's personal life, was a trajectory that bore thinking about. That Sofia was a woman who had clearly identified what she wanted and had moved toward it with a directness that some people might call admirable and other people might call something else. That Diana herself, as the person who had brought Sofia to the city and to the building, had certain observations about her character that she would share if asked but would not volunteer because she was not that kind of person. The "I would share if asked but would not volunteer" construction was the most important part. It made Diana sound reluctant. It made the information seem more credible than a direct accusation. It made people ask. And when they asked, Diana said, with a careful sadness that was entirely performed, "I just want her to be okay. I just hope her intentions are what she says they are." She said nothing specific. She never said anything specific. She never needed to. The rumors reached Gabriel in November at a charity event for a children's literacy foundation that he attended every year, and that was populated by the particular cross-section of the city's business and social world that he moved in most regularly. A man he had known for a decade. A man he respected and whose judgment he had trusted in professional contexts. Pulled him aside near the bar and said, with the careful tone of someone who believes they are performing a kindness, "I have been hearing some things about your new assistant. About how she came to be in your life. I just wanted you to know. As a friend." The man said nothing specific. He never said anything specific. He simply created, with 5 sentences and a tone of concerned friendship, a space in which a question had been placed that had not been there before. Gabriel thanked him. He went home that night and sat in his apartment on the Upper West Side and thought about it for exactly as long as he needed to. He thought about the sidewalk on Fifth Avenue in April, about the woman who had produced a clean cloth from her cart and addressed the situation with efficient calm, and then raised an eyebrow at something careless he had said and told him that most people speak well when someone takes the time to listen. He thought about the 53-minute phone call with his mother. He thought about the schedule adjustments he had not asked for and the meeting preparation he had not expected, and the Friday evening in the West Village when he had sat across from someone over pasta and good wine and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the person in front of him was fully present and not performing presence. He thought about his mother, who had never warmed to a single person he had ever been with, calling Sofia directly because she had found someone who actually listened. He thought about all of this for the appropriate amount of time. And then he called Sofia. He said, "I heard some things tonight." He paused. "I want you to know I don't believe any of them." There was a silence on Sofia's end of the line. Then she said, "Thank you for telling me." He said, "I should have said it without needing to be asked." She said, "Yes, but you said it." Diana asked Sofia to move out in November. She did it on a Tuesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment where Sofia had spent 8 months sleeping on a couch, with the same warm and practiced tone of reasonableness that she had used when she set the rent and when she had said, "Of course, come, we will figure it out together" 8 months before that. She said she needed her space back. She said Sofia was doing so well now. She said, and this was the sentence that Sofia would remember the longest, that she would turn over in her mind in the weeks that followed, "You don't need me anymore." Sofia looked at her across the kitchen table. She thought about 8 months on a couch. She thought about the rent payments at the above-market rate. She thought about the small things she had been filing away, without quite admitting she was filing them away, since May, the tone of Diana's voice when she spoke about the office, the questions that were slightly too pointed, the warmth that arrived slightly too late and lasted slightly too briefly. She did not say any of this. She said, "Okay, I will find somewhere by the end of the month." She stood up. She went to the couch, her couch, the couch that had been her address for 8 months, and she sat on it, and she thought about whether she was going to cry. She decided she was not. Not because she was not hurt. She was. But because she was Sofia Reyes, and Sofia Reyes had arrived at Penn Station with $60 and the belief that the story was still being written, and the story was still being written, and there was not a couch in the Bronx or a whisper campaign in a building on Fifth Avenue that was going to change that. She found an apartment in Washington Heights in 3 weeks. It was small, and it was on the 4th floor of a building without an elevator, and the radiator made a sound in the night like a small animal in distress. But it had a window in the bedroom that looked east and caught the morning light in a way that made Sofia, on her first morning there, stand at the window in her socks and feel the sun on her face and think of her grandmother Carmen's marigolds and think, Mama was right. The city always knew what to do with me. She called Rosa that Sunday from the apartment, her apartment, the first apartment she had ever had that was entirely her own, and when Rosa asked how the city was treating her, Sofia said, "Like it has been waiting for me." Rosa cried. Sofia let her. Then she cried a little too. Then they talked for an hour about tamales and the garden in Belen and whether Carmen's marigolds were going to bloom late that year because of the frost. And it was the best Sunday phone call Sofia could remember in a very long time, because she was having it from her own kitchen table, with her own mug of coffee, in her own apartment, and the morning light was coming through the east window the way good light always comes, without asking permission, without announcing itself, simply present, and warm, and already there before you thought to look for it. Gabriel helped her move. He did not make a production of it. He showed up on a Saturday morning in jeans and a jacket that had seen better days, and he carried boxes up 4 flights of stairs without an elevator without complaint. And when they were done, he made coffee in her new kitchen with the coffee maker still in its box that he had brought as a housewarming gift. "Everyone needs a good coffee maker," he said, "especially after what happened last April." And they sat at her kitchen table and drank coffee and looked out the east window at Washington Heights in the November morning, and it felt, without being named, like something that had decided what it was. Gabriel Montoya proposed to Sofia Reyes on a Tuesday evening in January, in Central Park, on a bench near the Bethesda fountain. He had not planned it for a Tuesday. He had planned it for a Saturday, with a reservation at a restaurant she loved and a conversation he had rehearsed in a setting that the occasion seemed to demand. But on Tuesday he had come out of a board meeting to find Sofia at her desk reading something with a slight frown of concentration. the frown she wore when she was working on something that mattered. And she had looked up when she heard him, and the frown had dissolved into the particular warmth that she reserved. He had come to understand. For people she was genuinely glad to see. And he had looked at her looking at him, and he had thought, I am not waiting until Saturday. He told her he had something to do after work and asked if she would walk with him. She said yes without asking where. They walked from the office to the park in the January cold, talking about nothing in particular. The board meeting, a building project in Brooklyn he was excited about, a book Elena had recommended that Sofia was in the middle of. And when they reached the bench by the fountain, he stopped, and she stopped, and he took the ring from his pocket, and he looked at her, and he said, Sofia, I have been building things my whole life. Buildings that I wanted to last, that I wanted to mean something to the people inside them. And I have learned, in 9 years of doing this, that the most important thing about any structure is not its height, or its design, or its address. It is the quality of what is built into its foundation. I would like to build something with you. I would like you to be my foundation. Will you marry me? Sofia looked at him. She looked at the ring. She looked at the Bethesda fountain, still in the January air, and the bare winter trees of Central Park, and the city skyline visible beyond them in the early evening dark. She said yes before he finished asking. He already knew she was going to. He asked anyway, because some things deserve to be asked properly, and because Sofia Reyes was the kind of woman for whom properly was the only acceptable option. Elena Montoya called Sofia at 9 o'clock that evening, 2 hours after the proposal. She had not been told yet. Gabriel had called her after they got back to Sofia's apartment, and she had answered on the first ring, which she never did, which told Gabriel she had been waiting. She cried on the phone. Gabriel had not seen his mother cry since his father's funeral, and he stood in Sofia's kitchen holding his phone and watching Sofia watch him with an expression of total warmth, and he thought, my mother is crying because of this woman. Because of the tamale conversation and the garden soil and the 45-minute phone calls and the way Sofia Reyes listened, fully, completely, with her whole self, to the people who needed to be heard. Elena cried, and then she stopped crying, and then she said, in a voice that was both slightly damp and entirely herself, I gave him the ring 2 weeks ago, and I told him not to wait any longer. He never listens to me. Sofia, who was listening on speakerphone from across the kitchen, said, he listened this time. Mrs. Montoya. Elena said, Elena. You call me Elena now. And then she cried again. The engagement was announced in February, and it reached the people who needed to reach through the natural channels by which announcements reach people in a city that runs on information. It reached Diana Cruz on a Thursday morning through a message from Patricia in operations, who sent it with 3 exclamation marks and a string of emoji that Diana read on her phone, standing at her kitchen counter with her morning coffee, and then put the phone face down on the counter and stood very still for a long time. She had known it was coming. She had been watching the pieces move for months, and she had understood, with the part of herself that was honest even when it was inconvenient, that the campaign she had run in the autumn had not worked and was not going to work, because Sofia Reyes was not the kind of person who could be reduced by implication. Because Gabriel Montoya was not the kind of man who could be moved from something real by something unverified. Because the thing between them was the kind of thing that people who love each other in the real, foundational, I want to build something with you way do not walk away from, because someone at a charity event says something careful and unspecific near a bar. Diana stood at her kitchen counter, and she felt the full weight of the thing she had done, and the full weight of what it had cost her, and the full weight of the understanding, arriving now and unavoidable, that the person she had worked against was the person who had arrived at her door with $60 in gratitude for a couch and had never, in 8 months of sleeping on it, been anything but genuinely kind to her. She put her coffee mug in the sink. She picked up her phone. She stared at Sofia's contact for a long time. She put the phone down. She was not ready yet, but she was beginning to understand that being ready was something she was going to have to work toward, because what she owed Sofia Reyes was not a text message. It was a conversation, a real one, the kind that could only be at face-to-face, with nothing managed and nothing performed, and the truth said plainly and sat with fully. She was not ready for that yet, but she was beginning. Diana Cruz asked Sofia to meet her for coffee in March, 3 weeks before the wedding. She chose a coffee shop in Washington Heights, close to Sofia's apartment. It was a choice that said something, a deliberate meeting on Sofia's ground, an acknowledgement that she was coming to Sofia and not asking Sofia to come to her. Sofia agreed to meet. She had known this conversation was coming in the way that people know things that have not yet happened but are already underway. She had not been angry at Diana in the months since the eviction from the couch. Or rather, she had been angry and had felt it fully and cleanly, and had put it somewhere honest inside herself without letting it become the story she told about her own life, because she was not the kind of person who organized her understanding of herself around other people's behavior toward her. She arrived at the coffee shop first. She ordered 2 coffees. She ordered Diana's without thinking, because she still remembered exactly how Diana took it, because Sofia Reyes paid attention to the people in her life even when those people had not been paying attention back. When Diana came through the door and saw the second coffee already on the table, she stopped walking for a moment. Then she sat down. She looked at Sofia across the table and she said, without preamble and without the practiced tone of reasonableness, "I owe you an honest conversation. I am going to try to have it." She told Sofia everything. Not in the specific tactical detail of a confession, not the names of the people she had spoken to or the exact words she had used, but in the honest emotional truth of it, which was the part that mattered. She said she had been in New York City for 4 years waiting for a life that kept not arriving. She said that when Sofia called from Berlin, she had said yes with genuine warmth and had also, in the same moment, felt something she had not been willing to look at, the particular ache of someone whose door is always open to other people's beginnings because their own beginning seems perpetually, inexplicably delayed. She said that watching Sofia move through the city with the ease of someone for whom the city had been waiting, the janitor job, the coffee on the sidewalk, the 34th floor, Elena Montoya's phone calls, had broken something in her that she had not handled with grace or honesty or the care that Sofia deserved. She said she had done things she was not proud of. She said she was not going to minimize them or explain them away. She said she was sorry. She said it plainly, looking at Sofia directly, without qualifying it or surrounding it with excuses, because she understood that a sorry surrounded by excuses is not a sorry. It is a negotiation, and Sofia had not come to negotiate. She said, "You came to this city with nothing, and you became everything through nothing but who you actually are. And I could not handle watching that while I was still waiting. That is the truth. I am sorry." Sofia looked at her across the table for a long moment. She held the silence long enough for it to be real, not punishing, not theatrical, just the natural silence of a person absorbing something significant and not pretending it is smaller than it is. Then she said, "I know, Diana. I think I always knew." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, the same way she had held the mug on the park bench in July, the way she held things she was grateful for, the way her grandmother Carmen held things. She said, "You gave me a couch when I had nothing. I slept on it for 8 months, and I was grateful for it every single morning." That is also true. Both things are true. Diana's eyes had filled. She was not performing it. Sofia reached across the table and put her hand over Diana's. She said, "I want you to be my maid of honor." Diana looked at her. The tears came then, not delicately, not photographically, but in the real and ungainly way that tears come when the body has been holding something for a long time and permission has suddenly arrived. She said, "Sofia, after everything." Sofia said, "After everything." Yes. She said it the way you say things that are both improbable and completely decided, the way you say things that are true because you have chosen to make them true, because forgiveness is not the absence of memory, but the decision to build on top of it rather than under it. The wedding was held on a Saturday in April, exactly 1 year after the coffee spill on Fifth Avenue, in a ballroom in the city that Gabriel had chosen because it had the highest ceilings and the most extraordinary natural light he had ever seen in an interior space, the kind that made everyone inside it feel, without knowing why, entirely welcome. Elena Montoya cried through the ceremony, and then stopped crying and straightened her shoulders and told everyone at her table that she had known this was going to happen from the moment she had a 45-minute phone call with an executive assistant about tamale masa, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Rosa Reyes flew in from Berlin with Carmen, who wore her best dress and brought a tin of her tamales wrapped in foil and gave them to the kitchen staff with specific instructions that they were to be served at the reception regardless of what the catering menu said, which they were. Diana Cruz stood beside Sofia at the altar in the dress they had chosen together over 3 Saturdays of looking and talking and slowly, imperfectly, In the way of two people who have hurt each other and have chosen to try anyway, rebuilding something that deserved to be rebuilt. She held Sofia's bouquet. She did not let go of it the entire ceremony. She was the first person to hug Sofia after the vows, and the hug lasted long enough to be real. And Sofia Reyes, who had arrived at Penn Station 13 months earlier with one suitcase and $60 and a friend's address on a folded piece of paper, who had slept on a couch and mopped floors and raised an eyebrow on a sidewalk and talked about tamale masa with a woman who became her mother-in-law, who had been evicted and had moved to Washington Heights and watched the morning light come through her east-facing window and decided it was enough, who had been whispered about and had not crumbled, who had been loved by a man who built things to make people feel held and had built the most important thing he had ever built by simply paying attention to her. Sofia Reyes stood in the ballroom with the extraordinary light and looked at the room she was in and thought, this is what the beginning was building toward. She had always believed in the beginning of things. She had arrived at the destination, and the destination, it turned out, had good light. The very best light. The kind that had clearly been designed by someone who understood, before he had ever met her, that the most important thing about any space was that the people inside it should feel completely, unconditionally held. This is what the city does when you let it. This is what New York does with the people who arrive at its stations with $60 and a belief so quiet and so stubborn and so completely unreasonable that the city cannot help but eventually recognize it. It does not make it easy. It does not make it fast. It does not spare you the couch or the gray coverall or the whisper campaign or the Tuesday in November when someone you trusted hands you 2 weeks' notice with a warm smile. It gives you all of those things, because all of those things are the beginning, and the beginning is where the story is made. The $60 is gone. The couch is gone. The coverall is long gone. But the belief, the quiet, stubborn, completely unreasonable belief that the story is still being written and that the next page has not been turned yet, that is still there. It will always be there. It is the only thing Sofia Reyes brought to New York City that truly mattered. And it is the only thing she needed. If Sofia's story moved you tonight, if somewhere in the $60 or the couch or the eyebrow on the sidewalk or the tamale conversation or the morning light through the east window you recognized something about your own beginning or about someone you love who is still in theirs, leave a comment and tell us. Tell us where you are watching from tonight. Tell us what you are thinking. Tell us if you believe in the beginning of things the way Sofia believed in them, because we think you do. We think that is why you are here, watching this, at this hour, on this channel. Before we go, if you have not yet subscribed to Letters Never Sent, please do it now. Every story on this channel is the kind that finds you when you need it. Every story lives in the quiet places, the folded piece of paper in the jacket pocket, the thin blanket on the couch, the morning light through the east window, the ring taken out on a Tuesday instead of a Saturday, because some things should not wait. We have more stories coming. Stories that will stay with you. Stories that will find you at exactly the right time. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. This story was for everyone who has ever arrived somewhere new with very little and refused, quietly, stubbornly, completely, to let that be the end of the story. You are the beginning. You have always been the beginning.